Hello, everyone. I think we are live. Let us let us know. All live streams start out like that. It's like, hey, we have no idea if what we're doing is working. Um, but yeah, let us know, and I'm gonna try and pull up the live stream on my phone real quick, so we can see if there's any comments or anything as we're diving in. Make sure everything's working on our end.
It is streaming. I just viewed the
That's
video
amazing.
myself.
And can you hear anything?
I
That's
can
right.
hear.
Cool. Let me pull it up so I can monitor the comments. Yeah, so we tried to do our last live stream on YouTube, and we went to go live, and it was like, hey, thanks for wanting to go live on YouTube for the first time. You are able to do so in 24 hours. And we were like, well, that's not going to work. So we jumped to Facebook, and so that always seems to work well. But we figured YouTube would be more accessible um, for everybody, and so we're here. And yeah, I've got it pulled up. Let me just open it up here. And cool. Yeah. So what we're gonna do tonight is just kind of talk about the development of the game, and we're gonna show you the first prototype, which you see here on TTS. This is the first version of the game that was ever created and played, and so we'll talk about it. And if you browse on our YouTube channel, we do have some other development dives where we kind of go through different versions of the game, and that was just Colton and I before Dennis joined. So it'll be fun to talk through some of this stuff with Dennis, and maybe he can tell us how terrible some of these things were, or maybe like why didn't you keep this? This is so good. Um, but yeah, as we're going, feel free to ask questions if you're watching live, or if you watch later, feel free to drop questions in the comments, and we'll be sure to answer them. Any questions about the game, the development of the game, why we got rid of things or why we kept things, and Colton, if you want, if you haven't already, go ahead and share like the link and everything to like our Facebook group, Discord, as a reminder for people who want to jump in. Um, but,
Okay.
but yeah,
Can
so
do.
this is the inaugural play of Galactic Cruise that happened, I believe, in May.
I think Dennis should explain how
Yes.
it's played because he's probably never seen.
Yeah. Why don't you give us like a
Well,
little 1 or 2 minute rundown of what you think all these things do?
I definitely have a cue about this card. What are cue cards?
I bet you.
We do get to choose one of the things. Well, let me
I
see.
was gonna say, I bet you know
So
where the cue card goes.
cue card 10. Okay, so the fuel price goes down 1 million, or you set it to 3 million. You get a government grant. In order to get the grant, you have to construct 2 buildings.
So people can see.
Launching is normal, and the food drive is like mild spicy. It's not super spicy yet.
Spicy.
It's
The
just like
spicy
mild.
food.
Yeah, we're not. This isn't for the adventurous guests at this point. This is more of like the relaxing guests.
That's about accurate. So yeah, these cue cards came out every round. So we had rounds in the game. At this point, I think there were, was it 4 rounds in this version? There's nothing that, no, there were 10. Weren't we playing through all 10 of these
Mm,
cards?
there were 10 rounds.
there
That's
were
right.
there were
Yes,
10
that's exactly
rounds,
right.
which eventually made it down to 4 because 10 was 250% too many. And so, yeah, every round these came out. So the fuel price. So if you look up here at the top of the board, well, we'll give a little overview of the board here. So this was started out as just like a very basic worker placement game, where you would place a worker, take an action, and that was it. And so there were just a lot of different places to place a worker, and so we still had food, oxygen, and fuel in the game. So that's been in there the whole time. But the food here, you could come and you could gain 1 food, or you could gain 3 food by spending 2 money. And we were calling it millions of dollars for a long time. Excuse me. And so you'll see the 2M or number M. That's just that in millions of dollars. And so you could get food and oxygen this way, but then the fuel, we call it the fuel shop. This changed throughout the game. And so you could buy as many as you want, but you had to pay the current market price. And so, for example, the Q card in this case would say down 1 million or set to 3 million. So I think it started the game at 1 million or 3 million. I can't remember. But you would turn over a Q card at the start of the round. It would tell you. So like in this case, it would say down 1 million.
That sounds right.
So
Yeah.
you would move it down 1 million, and that would be the price for the round. Or like if it was already at 1 million and you couldn't reduce it by any. That's what that extra set to 3 million meant. It's just saying, hey, if you can't do what it says, then set it to what. So the fuel price changed. So that made it interesting in the fact that like there was a little tension of knowing when to buy fuel. So how do you feel about that mechanic, Dennis? Are you glad it doesn't exist, or is it interesting?
Well, something like this, could potentially work, but I'm most curious about why there's only a market for fuel and not for food or for oxygen.
Yeah, I have no idea. I think it was just like 3 of the same thing would be boring, so let's spice it up a little bit and make one of them interesting.
And we were still in those COVID times. Gas prices were crazy. They were always fluctuating. Probably pulled that one from real life. Who knows? I'm making that up. That could be or not be.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sure it was just us trying to be unique, and me being like, oh man, that's so innovative. Never been done before. And we kept it, I'm sure, for a little bit.
So that was the resources. So the Q card determined that. The grant on the Q card was kind of like a public objective. So in this case, it says, in order to accept the grant, you must have constructed at least 2 buildings, or what later became to be known as developments. And the grant was 6 million. And so there was a space. There was a, oh yeah.
Gain funding or accept grant.
So you could gain funding, and you started with a certain amount of funding, but then you could increase that. Kind of like the funding bonuses, you start with a base value, and then that increases over time. Same here. So everybody starts with, I think, 2 million funding, and then you can do things to increase it. So you could go here, get the amount of money that is at your level, or you could accept the grant, and I think you would just take this token, and we've just had you place it down here to denote that you accepted the grant, so only one player could get the grant. And that was usually a lot more money.
Humongous first player advantage.
Yeah, a little bit. Well, and what made it weird is these were random. These Q cards were random, right? And so it's not like you could see the next few coming out. Now, like there were a few ways to look at some, but
yeah, and I felt like some of them were like bad things. Like this one was like have like the worst shuttle.
Yeah, so at some point I think we were like, we need to include something to help players who are behind, like as a catch-up thing, and so that was kind of it. So it's not just like the player who's winning can always accomplish it the quickest, was the idea. So we tried to balance it out there. But yeah, that was what the grant was, the launch. So this dictated a few things. So this was more of like the realistic simulation type thing. So it's like if the launch was cloudy, then you would have to spend an extra fuel when you would launch. Normal, if it was crowded, you'd have to have some extra food to launch because there's a lot of people there. You had to feed them. And then stormy, you couldn't launch that round. And I don't know if we had something for oxygen, but I think those are all the ones. Crowded, and then some weather stuff. And then the food drive was probably the worst part of the game that didn't make it. So it has nothing to do with anything at all. The theme, nothing. But at the end of the round, correct me if I'm wrong, Colton, but at the end of the round, you can see the order of play here. At the end of the round, you did the food drive, and because we felt like their food had no value, we were like, well, we gotta give reason for people want to get food. So why don't we have a food drive? And so it was at the end of the round, in turn order, you would say how much food you want to donate to the food drive. You could only go once, and you couldn't change or lower it based on what other players said. Just one time around, and the player who gave the most food got to be first player for the next round. And so it gave an advantage to last player, right? Because like if everybody was like, oh, I don't want to do it, or I just want to give one, last player could always give the most to then become first player for the next round. But it didn't make any sense for anything else in the game. It was just the food drive phase. So, but that was interesting. So
Like, and it's for the homeless, like a food
no,
drive.
we never knew where it went.
Or-
We just donated it, and that was it. Like it was really a terrible idea. It was one of those like band-aids to cover up something else
Well,
that was
and
broken.
you had to spend it, even
Mhm.
if you lost.
You did.
Like, so if I said 2 food, TK 3 food, and Dennis said 5 food, I don't know why he would do that, but let's say it was 2, 3, 4. We all had to still
Yeah.
spend it, even if you were not the winner of the auction. It was awful.
So that-
Awful.
So did you get a
you,
free
you
fuel for
did.
whoever
If
won
you
it
won
as
it,
well?
you also got a bonus.
Okay.
Yep. And that changed every time.
Huh.
For some reason.
So you could donate food and then get
Yeah, you
food
could.
back?
It's great, right? It's like, oh, there's too much donations. Take some back with you. But yeah, so that was it. That was the cue card. A lot of times spent on the cue card there, but it's an interesting part of this game. But yeah, the rest of it, a lot of it is pretty similar, right? Like you've got drawing blueprints, you've got building your cruises, and we'll look at a little bit of those in a minute. You've got flight plans, so this is kind of your trip that you're taking. These were actually drawn and then played when you launched. And then you would schedule a flight. So scheduling was like taking a drawn flight plan that you had in your hand and then like adding it to your shuttle to like schedule that trip. Hiring department, hiring new workers. We still have something similar to that. Construct a building. So if we go down to the player board, look at the yellow one over here. So the player board has a lot of similar things, of course, a lot of very different things. So you have space for resources on your player board: food, oxygen, fuel. In the first version of the game, you could hold up to 9, which became quite excessive. But you had your developments, and so the developments started out as these little tokens. They were called buildings at this point. On their stuff under here, a nice little surprise. So there's victory points that you can uncover as you built them, kind of like you do now. You score based on how many you built. Place for your workers, the steps to launch a shuttle, and then some other tokens that pertain to launching and whatnot. We may hit those a little bit, but you also started with the shuttle, so you can see everybody has a cockpit and an engine tile, as well as the blueprints or the rooms. So we'll look at those here in a second. We'll go back up to the main board. But you also had a hangar, and so the hangar was kind of your shuttle limit. So right now, of course, in the game, you can have up to 3 shuttles. In this version, you could have up to 3 shuttles as well, but you had to build one of your developments instead of on the main board onto a hangar, and you would get another spot to hold your shuttles there. But yeah, any good takeaways here, Dennis, from the player board that you enjoy?
I kind of like building out the hangars.
That was
sounds
cool. Yeah, like I think the reason it finally got removed was it was just like another barrier that players had to get through to do the fun things and the cool things in the game.
Mm.
And so I think that's probably why it eventually made its way out.
I think we got to bring the food drive back in the expansion.
The food drive expansion. Yeah. Cool. Well, all of that was to talk about these developments. So I'm going to grab a couple of these. Let's go back over to the main board. So the way developments worked, of course, in the game now, they can give you access to technologies or increase your action selection between departments. Here, what they did is they made the individual actions better. And so, for example, if you built a development here, kind of like what technologies do now, they did have requirements. Like if you wanted to put a development in this section, it would have to come from your oxygen row and so forth. But they all affected that specific action. So like this one makes building segments into your shuttle. All of them cost 1 less, kind of like the tech we have in the game now. The blueprints, I think you were just drawing 1 blueprint at a time.
Blindly.
So-
Yep. And just off the top.
Yeah.
Yep.
So here's the deck of them. We'll look at a couple of them up here. Now the squares represented the cabins. So used to the blueprints had the rooms inside of them. So like some wouldn't hold people. Like obviously a restaurant's not going to hold people. But then you would have rooms. You'd have a suite, an interior room, and so forth, where you could fit people. We'll talk about people in a minute because that's fun. But then they also had these connection points on the top and bottom, kind of like we have the cabins now. But it was if you matched them, you would gain extra points. I don't think it was a requirement, right, Colton?
The little things in between,
Yeah.
it was optional, but it gave you extra
Gave you
points if
extra
they
points if
matched
you
up.
But yeah, so they had the cost on them, victory points, similar to what they do now. But yeah, so you were just blindly drawing one of these, and then you were building one. So that's one of the things that made this game very slow, or version very slow, was you were doing things very small steps. So drawing one shuttle segment at a time. And if it wasn't the one you wanted, then you had to draw again. But building a development on it did give you the option to draw 3, choose 1. So that's what that 3-1 is. So that was a little more interesting. But yeah. Colton, you want to talk about the guest, how the guest worked in this version? 'Cause that's quite different than it is now.
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember. Let's see. So every round you would add guests equal to player count, or was it a few started out here and then? I think that's what that means right there. Like,
yeah, it was player count. Yeah,
and the
it
guests
did change
were
a few times, but I think in this version it was just player count.
Yeah. So it's like, and these guests were dice. So,
the dice.
So for our 3-player game, we maybe bring out 3 dice. Oh, look at that. They're all orange. This is probably not a self-shuffling bag because we probably didn't know how to do that yet. But you would roll them, and then they would get added to the waiting list. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, I bet the numbers on them correspond to the duration they would like to travel. But you would be wrong. The numbers actually refer to what type of room they would like to stay in, and the colors corresponded to a duration. That was the first silly thing that we did. So, for instance, this Orange 6 here wants to go on a 3-month cruise and wants to stay in a suite room. Now, every round, though, anything here would move down, which means that after 2 rounds, they would now stay in any room. After another round, they would go on a trip of any length. And depending on the version of the game, these sometimes stacked, so that by the time they got to the level, put those dice anywhere, going anywhere. And then other versions that didn't stack, so it was like, here they're kind of like a wild number, and then by the time they came down, here they were a wild color, but not both. I can't remember
many different
what it was in the very first version.
Yeah, the dice were interesting. They stayed for quite a while, and then they left and came back in different forms. But one of the other things that was interesting was like the durations, right? Because right now, currently in the game, you've got the cruise tiles, right? And in the cruise tiles, give you like the duration, more or less, right? They'll have 2 stops up to 4 stops, mixing between the destinations, days in space, kind of things. But in this version, we just had 4 different durations. There's a lot less focus on like what actually happened during the trip. I think for a long time it was just build your shuttles, launch them. They may be gone for some time, and then they come back. There was no kind of theme of like what are they doing, why are they out, and all that. And so in this version, if you look over here on the right of the board, we had 4 durations, and this was kind of meant to be more realistic as like a space exploration type journey. And so it was 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and 12 months. And so what happened when you launch is, if you look down here at the yellow player board, there were these tokens on the bottom left. It had that 1 and the arrow, and there were 2 for each one. And so, for example, if you were to launch this shuttle, you would place this somewhere up here, and this would denote that this is shuttle number 1, and so if you had multiple shuttles up, you could tell which was which. But then the second token would come up here, and it would go into the duration that it launched in. And then at the end of every round, right before the food drive, we would advance the flights, and so they would all shift down 1 slot until they came back, and then at which point you had to like pay to clean and repair your shuttle. And the amount that you had to pay was based on the direction of this arrow, I believe. And so I think that's why these arrows are here, right? You would kind of angle them.
Yeah.
When you came down here, I know this is probably more clear in like the next iteration or two of Galactic Cruise. But I think each round, if it was still here, you would rotate it, and that would make it cheaper to clean and repair. It's like the longer you waited, the cheaper it became, or something like that.
I think the thing you're talking about maybe came. I think it maybe just came. I think what you're saying may have come in a later iteration. I think maybe it just came down, and you just paid whatever it was based on the direction it was going.
Yeah.
And then we added the whole
like
clock thing at another time, maybe.
Right.
Who knows?
So what do you think, Dennis? Do you like durations or cruise tiles, or do you think we went in a good direction with the game?
Well, the first version I played did have durations, but it didn't work like
yours
this.
Were 2, 4, and 6 weeks, right?
I believe so, and you would just slide the whole thing over.
Yeah, you would stack up your
board.
cruise tiles
from
above your player board and move the actual ship.
Yeah.
Now another thing we can hit, and then we may wrap up our little segment here on version number 1, is the technologies. And this is one of those areas that we often think about and come back to. I know if people ask us if there was like something in the game that we hated getting rid of or would want to bring it back, we often mention this. So Colton, you want to kind of explain how it works and why we miss it?
Yeah, so there was a worker placement spot up here that for some inexplicable reason you can build buildings up here, but they didn't give you a bonus in this first version apparently. Where basically you could either invent technologies, or you could just move your cube up through here and basically learn technologies. And I think the idea was if you were in the same row or like the same section or higher than a technology, you could use it. Now, when you built it, you built one of your buildings on it. But like in this situation, if let's say that I was yellow and I had invented this technology here, TK and I could both use it. If TK was green and I was yellow, we both have access to this. But if I was, say, up here and I'd invented this technology, that is just mine to use until TK gets, up here, and then he has access to it as well. I think is how it worked.
That's it.
Again, this is one of those things that kind of, I think it maybe changed a little bit over time, but that's more or less how it
streamlined and had more rules. Like I think the first time we played it, we may have just been like kind of making it up as we go. Like how many cards can be here? How many can each player have? How does gaining access work? Like do you have to be at the star level of that, or is it just in that section? Or I think a lot of that we were probably just kind of making up as we went. I can't. Right. There's so many versions that's just like mixed in my brain.
Right. Yeah. This is by far my favorite thing that is not in the game anymore.
Yeah.
Was like moving up that track and like gaining access that way.
Another version that may
that's pretty cool.
Be closer to like the pinnacle of this tech thing. That
Mhm.
seems a little bit better. But like we've mentioned it to Dennis, right? We've mentioned it to you before and talked about it. Pretty sure we have. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're loading up the next one?
Yeah, I can. Let me pull up
Also, it may just be on my end, but you guys are like crackly on your audio. But as long as you can hear each other
Yeah.
and me and other people can hear you fine, like I can figure out what you're
Feel
saying.
free to pull it up and listen to like the live stream if you want to double check it. If somebody wants to.
I can hear both of you guys clearly, so
Okay, it's probably just on my end, and I can still tell what you guys are saying. I just wanted to make sure that we were not like everyone was crackly. But if it's just on my end, that's fine. I'm used to it.
All right, so here everybody can see the many different versions of Galactic Cruise. We're on like 167 right now. Now, granted, many of these versions are small changes, but you can see the different kind of versions of the board layout. Like here, we're on a horizontal board, and then we eventually go to a vertical board. But let me try and find the last iteration with that tech tree system. So it's gone by version 30. Let's see, it looks like it's still here in version 23, so I'm going to open version 23.
this is getting
What?
closer.
5 player boards?
This is getting closer to what I
Yeah,
played.
maybe we'll pull up the version you played, because that's the vertical board. You played one of the first iterations probably of the vertical board. But yeah, so here is the new tech system. I think this is as far as it made it. And I think so. At this point, we had 4 technologies visible that you could choose from, so it wasn't just a blind draw. All shuttle segments cost 1 less to install. When advancing on a circle of influence, immediately gain the bonus you land on. You may bump your own worker and gain the bonus. When bumping another player, also gain the bonus they gain. So a lot of that stuff kind of still exists in various forms. But whenever you took the technology action, you can kind of see here, well, let's kind of do a tangent before we get to technologies, is how the kind of locations and action system works. Because we ended up splitting the technology actions. One is advancing up on the track, and then the other is inventing or building a technology. But now you kind of see the evolution of the locations and action selection system. So here there's 8 locations instead of 6. They each have 2 actions. They're currently paired together. We played with them paired for a while until we decided to split them so you can mix them up, which added a lot of that variability to the game. But you would place a worker, 2 actions. You could build your developments in between locations to have access to adjacent locations. And there are actually a lot more connections kind of across the middle with the 8 locations. Yeah, the 2 technology ones were kind of together there. And so one, of course, would move you up the track. Everybody had this little technology-looking token. You would move up, and then you could invent a technology, I believe, in the level you're in. And I feel like at some point, maybe it wasn't this version, but at some point it was like you could only have one technology yourself invented in each level. It's like each player could invent one technology per level.
That sounds right.
And
Yeah.
so you would invent it, place it here, of course, put your development on it. And then down on the bottom right, this tells you that if this is our money token that we had, it was just an M with a number in it. It's telling you that if you wanted to use somebody else's technology, you had to pay money based on where you're at on the track. So in this case, like if this was here and it was invented by yellow and red was here, they would have to pay the amount of money in between them and the star of that level. So in this case, they'd have to pay 1, which is on here, plus these numbers here. So red would have to pay 3 to use this. So you could always use players' technologies. It was just kind of thematically, I think it was set up so that like
Mm.
if you knew how to use it, it cost you less. But if you didn't know how to use it, like if your technology knowledge wasn't up to where it needed to be, you basically have to pay because you'd be paying them more to kind of show you how to use it or help you with it or whatever. And so like that interaction was really cool, and I think that's kind of what lingers on in our minds of like, you know, why we really enjoyed it, because that was a really cool interaction with players.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this is anything stick out to you in this one, Dennis, that maybe you didn't get to play with that you're curious about, or
Definitely looks very
Mhm.
similar because I feel like these basically looked the same as what I played. There was the orange on the outside, the purple in the
Right.
middle. These pictures were the ones that
Yep.
were in use.
Yeah, that's something that's different. We had in a lot of versions of the game, some segments had 2 cabins, so you would have to, of course, match them perfectly, like the cabin matching. And that's also something we mention quite often, is that like the cabin matching wasn't something we just added on at the end. Like it was in the game for a very long time. We just pulled it out to make the base game more accessible. We did have some that were double. It just ended up not feeling like it was balanced properly, or like you were able to take the right amount of people versus cost and reward and all that kind of stuff. So we just brought it down to 1. But yeah, I think most of that's similar. Like at this point, it's just the cost, the victory points, the icon type, which has changed, but they all had 1 or 2 of the icon types. Yeah, and I think this has the version of Guest you played, right? Nope, this one still has dice. Interesting.
No, they were tokens.
One thing I will point out in the version before we move on are the wings. So you never played with the wings, did you?
Nope.
So, that's not a wing. So the wings are up here.
There's these things.
Computer's not working.
Oh, these ones up here.
Can you pull
Gold
some
and
out and bring them
silver.
down here to this white player board? So yeah, so they would, you would, did you get one of these every time you launched a shuttle? Is that right?
So I think the gold ones were like value 5s or whatever, and the silvers were, and it was based on when you took something. So if you were the first person to launch the shuttle, you got this top one.
That's right.
If you were the second person, it had fewer wings.
Right.
And I think, did these flip over to have? Oh no, never mind. That's at one point they flipped over to have fewer wings on them. Like if you didn't get them
They
launched.
did. I do know.
Or
I know
something.
that this is one of your favorite things that existed in the game.
That's one of my favorite things.
Here, why don't you show
Gosh.
what that is?
So the way this worked is, this is kind of like when you put one of your upgrade tokens into a bonus now. But what you did here is you put this, after you launched, you put it into your launch tower over here. And wherever you slotted it down, you got all the things that the arrows were pointing to. So basically, by covering something up, you gained other things. So it was this like puzzle of, so if I like covered up these 4 resources, I'm giving that up, but I'm getting 2 points, 2 resources, and 3 agenda cards. Apparently, sounds like a heck of a deal.
But yeah, it was fun.
But probably at the time, it was probably like a lot more balanced, or at least we thought it was.
Yeah, that was a cool decision point. But as you can see, we still have the hangers in this version. And the way these tokens worked when you launched is, somebody's the arrow's going the wrong way here, but you would basically place them beside the duration that you were taking. So if it was like a 6-week, you would place it here, and every round you would move it down to adjust it. I think that exists in the version Dennis played for the first time. No, it didn't. We stacked the
Didn't
shuttle.
use.
Yeah.
It,
Maybe, but
yeah, it didn't use these tokens. It was along
What's
here.
Yeah.
interesting is that exists here as well. So maybe we stopped using
Yeah,
this.
goes over and then down.
I think this must have been like a transition period of like we changed one thing but hadn't adjusted it somewhere else.
Must have been or something. There's also the one where you could pay 3 to flip this cockpit. Looks like it does something
yeah.
cool. Ho, 1 less
Yeah.
oxygen, and you get a victory
Your,
point.
Your engine, you could pay 3 money
How about
to flip
that?
it and save the fuel.
Hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah. Something from that first version that I don't think we looked at was that D6 that was on the
yeah.
board. That you could basically roll to
Mhm.
test your flight, and you could get like fuel
I
and
think that was one
oxygen
of the
discounts
ways
that way.
your funding increased for gaining money. Right, that token that increased on
Mhm.
that track. It's like if
Yeah.
you rolled, it was basically like, hey, if you tested your shuttle and it was approved, then more people are going to want to invest, and because they know it's successful, kind of thing. But yeah, so some of this other stuff exists in future versions. So let's jump to a version Dennis is familiar with, and we'll let Dennis talk for a while.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Oh, one last thing on the version we were just looking at was around the VP track, the funding and kind of like what we have in the reputation track, like where you could spin backwards for resources existed in this version,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is kind of cool that we, in some ways, still have something like that, but it works a lot better now than it did then.
So I'm gonna go. Oh, I have the dates on these as well. That's interesting. So we went to Proto ATL March of 22. Is that right?
Yeah.
It was probably March or April because Titus was born in
that's right.
March, so it was either like late March, early April, where I was home with like the family because he had just been
I think
born.
it's going to be in the
So
version 50s.
right around that time.
53, that was February. Version 57 is March 4th. Version 59, March 7th. Let's jump into the 60s. Version 62, 64. All right, we're going to jump to April 1st. So this should have been right around the time that Dennis played, or shortly after.
Yeah, and we probably would have printed off probably even a slightly older version if we had a physical version.
But right, I think these versions we were still making all by hand, so it would have been very accurate instead of like several weeks behind
stickered.
or something like that.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. Yeah, because it was all the sticker paper.
Yeah. So
good old sticker paper.
Dennis, why don't you tell the fine folks in internet world what we have here?
Yeah. Sure.
Man, Dennis looked at this and he committed his life to us.
So look at that parking lot. That's a great looking parking lot.
So one thing this is missing is the physical version was using a bunch of stuff from Dune Imperium.
My Dune Imperium is still all messed up because I have yet to put the pieces. I went to play it like a couple months ago and I was like, nope, can't do it.
And then I think we have a message in the chat. So Darius Dale,
feel free to ask questions.
How's it going?
Or what you see.
So yeah, this does look exactly like the version that I remember. So you only had 4 rounds to do everything. So there was just a set number of rounds. So I guess everything after this point, you can thank and or blame me for all the changes. No, just kidding. But yeah, this is what it was like. So I remember these guys were the guests. They were just numbers. It was how long they wanted to go onto a different flight. These cards at the top were, I think, did you have to match one of these, or you just scored points if you did?
I think you had to match at least one thing on one of the cards.
That sounds right.
I think so. And it was when you launched, or was there an action for that? That I don't
sure that happened
remember.
When you
scheduling. Scheduling, right? Yeah. So So if you had like a shuttle that was worth 8 diamonds, that was kind of what was the term
They
for
were
that? It was
called
like
diamonds. Yeah, it
the
wasn't victory. It
were they
wasn't
just called
victory points
diamonds?
at this point. Victory points were still the star.
Yeah, because the stars
Yep.
were victory points.
It's kind of like
This was like the
But the
yeah,
fanciness,
fanciness.
right?
like
Like
the
the
luxury
Correct.
level or something. Yeah, I don't
Mhm.
remember. And then the middle part, so there was always like a section for that. You had to have at least 8 of those diamonds or 2 over here. And then the middle part was like what amenities were on the ship. And so there was like the dining and activity. Um, were you what were you calling the heart
I
at the
think that was
time, or did the
activity
icon
was the heart,
change?
entertainment was the popcorn, and dining was the
Okay.
Mhm.
fork and spoon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely more familiar with the updated icons you had after this one.
Yeah.
And so the first person to do these would score these points. So like the harder ones would be worth more points. And then this is where it flipped. So the next person would
Mhm.
only get 4 points if they completed this. And so I remember that was like a scheduling, and then you would just this was kind of like these, kind of public objective cards that you were trying to race towards
Yeah.
when you went to
And then at
schedule
the
it.
end of the round is when you actually launched, right? Like there was a launch
There was a whole
phase.
launch
Yeah.
In this
phase.
one?
So in
Yeah.
the player
Yeah.
aid, there was a production phase. You get some income, work phase, work placement, and then flight phase. You would advance shuttles and launch.
Oh, and that's right. There was those little lock
Mhm.
tokens that you used to say that like I scheduled this cruise, and then you would get a
Yeah, from
token,
your launch tower.
which that's from your launch tower. Yeah. And you'd flip
And
it over and
that's how
say
you
this
got your
one's
Yeah,
income,
locked.
and that's how you increase that income you would
right?
get each round. And they were all the same, I believe. There was no like distinction between top 4, bottom 4. It was just here's what's underneath. And you didn't get anything if it wasn't uncovered. Like the top left was just saying, hey, here's what's under it.
Mm.
Mhm.
hmm So I do also remember. Let's look at the player aid here. So I remember you got income for developments you hadn't built. Yeah.
Yeah, right here.
So you'd
1
gain
million
money
for each one on your player board.
for not building things, but I was
No,
like,
no.
no, I'm
Also,
building
real quick,
things.
sorry,
I remember one of
we
the
had a question from Darius. I was going to
yeah
real quick. So,
yeah.
asked what point in the development process did agenda cards come in? Were they in that first version?
Early, I
They were.
think.
I
They
don't.
were
I
you
don't know if
had
they were in
card
the first version, but I know they were in the second one
It
that we
was
looked
so
at.
yeah. It would have been within the
I thought
first
they came pretty
month
early.
of playtesting. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
Sorry, Dennis.
That's right. So I remember one of the first things that I did when I played is when there's a technology that says pay 1 fewer when building developments. I'm like, well, I'm gonna get that, and then build all my stuff. So that's exactly what I did. And so I didn't actually remember this until now looking at it again, but I believe by building these, is that how you unlocked this
Yes, I
guy?
don't think there was an action
Or
for it.
the
It didn't
cost of
even.
it?
No action. It was literally just like it
It's
happened.
Nope.
just pay for money for everything above them. I
Well,
think
oh,
that's what
maybe there
that is
was an
saying.
action. I don't. Oh, yes, there is an action. Yep. So I'll
There it
probably
is.
Yeah,
just
it's right
yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Yep.
So action to hire your expert. Yeah. So they were all. Well, there's 3. What's crazy? There's 3 workers and 3 experts.
And 3 experts. But I don't think the experts actually did anything different. They were just extra work. Oh, no, there is something here. When bumping with your expert worker. Okay. So they did have something different.
Yep.
And
That's
the bump
incredible because but I do remember when you hired them, they went right here, right? But then there was maybe something that lets
Yes.
you
you
get
paid an
them.
extra you paid an extra 4. That's what the lightning bolt is. Get them right
That's
now
right.
if you pay
Yep.
an extra 4.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right.
Because this was
So
much
basically
more like
started at 16 to get them immediately.
Correct.
I
Yeah.
remember
yeah.
that now. That was cool.
This was much more of a kind of more standard worker placement game where there was a limited number of rounds and you just want to get more workers because you're getting more actions.
Mhm.
So that's
Mhm.
that's what I went for. I did that and built these and got out more workers because limited number of actions. So I didn't want to get as many actions as possible. So I do remember doing that. But yeah, a lot of this I mean, it's fairly.
Oh man, look at these vouchers over here.
Colin, why don't you tell people about vouchers?
Man, vouchers were everything.
They really were.
You didn't have a voucher, you were a chump. Because vouchers were, vouchers were a free pass to use a development, like someone else's.
No, I think
They could also be spent as an
I
extra
think it
action,
meant
right?
as a development. It's like you didn't even need other players to be there. I think, right? It was like
That's what it was. Yeah,
So
it was
it
like
gave it a
a
little
it was a
better, yeah.
temporary development. That's definitely what it was. Or it could be an extra action, or and I don't know if we ever printed this on here. Oh, we did. It could also, in a pinch, be a money or a resource. And you got vouchers. In this version, whenever you got bumped the first time, you go to the lowest spot for you. So if you're the first person to be bumped in a 4-player game, you come down here, you would gain your voucher, and then, so if white bumped out yellow would come over here, get that voucher, and then from now on, when yellow gets bumped, they would just join themselves, and then this was turn order for the next round.
Yeah.
And then we
I remember that as well.
shuttles
that was fun
accordingly.
because like if you were the first to get bumped, you were last next round, but you got your voucher first, which you could use, which was cool.
Yeah. And then if you're first the next round, there's a good chance you'll be the first one bumped, so then you'll be last. So what sometimes happened is that in a 4-player game, the second and third person just kept being the same people. Not always, but it was kind of a weird, like, 1 and 4 switching places a lot. I assume there was other places you got vouchers besides just here.
Maybe on some agenda cards.
Maybe you started.
Yeah, and then
I think you did start with
you could get one. So you got these 3 different goals at the beginning. Your secret goals. And you could discard them, so you wouldn't get to score this, but you would discard it and do something else instead. And when you told me that rule, I was like, "There's no way I'm discarding these. I'm gonna score points," and I did. So yeah, they gave you like these different objectives to go for, and so like this one would give you a voucher, but the vouchers I remember were very limited, because they were also like an extra action. And that's the only time I only ever used them for extra actions. Or at the end, they were worth
maybe
like
that's about the only time
points
you
each.
got them then.
Yeah, I think you only got like
It was
5 per game.
It was mainly that.
So they were very valuable.
I'm pretty sure there was an agenda card that gave them to you, and then you could discard this. But yeah, I don't think that they really came up very often. Oh, okay, wait. They're at the end of this track as well.
Yes.
So when you built developments in this area, you would get to move up your token,
Correct.
right? And then when somebody bumped you from that area, you would get like everything on this track.
Right.
And if you
if
you bumped the end of this, so like I already have 3 things built, and I built another one, then I would get something like that.
Which was these down here corresponded to like the top one, and these
The
down
top
here
and the bottom. There you go. Yeah.
So there were 2 more possible vouchers there. Yeah, I like the vouchers. I mean, especially when we had the round system, it was a good way to kind of eke out every ounce of it. But now that it's roundless,
Yeah, it was like that.
I guess we do still have a couple of agenda cards that
valuable without rounds.
Yeah, just having like a set number of turns and rounds, and then also you were only able to launch at the end of the round, which meant at most you were launching 4 times. And launching on the first round was like you basically had to do very specific actions to be able to launch on the first round. So I think I definitely the first time I played, I did not launch on the first round, but I launched on the next 3.
Yeah, because there were points at the end of the game for launching in X amount of different rounds.
It was whoever launched the most,
I guess you could launch.
Right?
Let's see. I think it was maybe both here, right? So like here, like if you launched in 4 different rounds, you got 20 points. But if you launched the most, you got an additional
right.
10.
Okay.
So I guess you could launch multiples.
So I think
You
you
just
could
had to be
launch
able to
multiples
pay
in
for
the
them.
same round.
I think
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. Okay. I think that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, I think so.
And then here we go. Yeah, it was 3 points for
Yeah.
each voucher. So a lot of times, I might just hold on to those. Especially, I know that there was one of these goal cards which gave you like a bunch of extra points for the vouchers. So I would just hold on to them and
I
score a
remember
ton of
that one.
points at the end for
Yeah.
vouchers.
Yeah, those gold cards, they still exist, but they made their way to the cockpits. Like most of the stuff on the secret goals is on the cockpits. Because I think we enjoyed the idea of like selecting what goal you wanted to go after, as opposed to just like being given at the beginning of the game. Granted, that's a lot of times really fun, and a lot of games have that and do it really well. But for this one, we just felt like it was more interesting to be able to pick your goal and go after it.
Yeah. Now, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about this action right here. The old hyperspeed, where you could pay 8 money to advance your cruise by one.
Yeah, let me make a cruise real quick.
One space.
I meant to grab a different one. That would.
Yeah.
So I feel like it'd be fun to kind of walk through my computer. You can grab that one that matches. The one right above it. So let's say we were launching this. So launching is listed here on the player board. So you would have to have a shuttle locked. So that would be scheduling it more or less. So you would just choose one of these tokens that would give you that bonus during income, and lock your shuttle to basically say, hey, this has been scheduled. And a cool note here is there is a max of 4 shuttle segments.
Yep.
In this version. But yeah, so launch is just listed on your player board here. So you'd pay food per guest. So this would have 1 guest. Right, so we would have 1 orange guest if you want to grab one for free. And then oxygens per segment, just like it is now. Fuel, that's based on the duration of the trip. So I think in this version you could choose, based on your guests, how long of a trip. So you had 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. All of the tokens had a plus except for the 6. It's like this guest wants to go on at least a 4 week. So you could do a 4 week or a 6 week in this case. And the fuel was just equal to that. So you would either pay 4 fuel or 6 fuel. You would just decide in the moment what you wanted to do, and then you would spend your resources as so. Then you would score, so you get the value of the guest. So in this case you would get 4 points. And you get points based on the duration. So if we were going 4 week, 8 points. And then you lose 2 points for each empty room, so each empty cabin. So if you didn't take guests to fill them up, like if you didn't have the food, or maybe the guests weren't available, right? Because I think when you launched, you pulled people directly from the waiting list, right? There was no like in between of like selling them tickets and then placing them into your ship.
That is a good question, but I think you're right.
Reserve them, more or less, right? You just pulled them.
Well, so this bottom one is loaded. I think you loaded them up ahead of time.
Take guests from the waiting list and assign them to one shuttle. Yeah, so you would basically sell them a ticket, make them get on the shuttle, and just sit there until you launch.
So yeah, they used to just be were just on the shuttle ahead of time.
It was one of those things where it was just like that doesn't really make sense, but we're going to run with it because it mechanically works.
Right.
Yeah, so you could pre-sell the tickets, and then you would launch. And so launching looked like you would place the guests back in the bag so they don't actually get to go on the trip. You sell them the ticket, and then they're like, "Yeah, sorry, just kidding." And then you stacked up your shuttle, so you can kind of see on the bottom of the player board. So you, under the launch section, you return the guest token back to the bag, and then you stack your shuttle and put your worker on it, and then you place it into the section that you're launching. So if we're launching a 4-week cruise, we would go here, and you would take one of your workers to pilot it, place them up there, and then again, this version had rounds, and so at the start of next round, actually no, it's at the end of each round, right? So like it's the income, the work, and then the flight phase. And so you would launch during the flight phase, and then at the start of next round you would do your income, do your worker placement stuff. Then when it got back to the launch phase again, or the flight phase, you could then launch and or advance your shuttles. So you would advance your shuttles, this guy would just move forward one step, and you would gain the points. And so this is kind of the only reason you would want to send out longer trips, is of course if you're taking higher valued guests, they would give you more points when you launch, and you'd also get the points when you worked your way back to Earth.
Right.
So,
Yep.
And it was way more painful being out year worker here. That's one of the reasons that you had
yeah,
6.
right.
It's because if you launched like a 6-week, that's gone for the rest of the game essentially.
So
So
Darius asks, what do you believe was the most difficult thing to incorporate into the game? I'm thinking that was like getting the passengers right. Right? Like that's the thing we spent the most time
Yeah.
trying a million different ways. Yeah.
I would agree with that. I would say that
Yeah.
we definitely spent the most time on guest,
Yeah,
I would
because like
say.
in the first version, so if you missed it, you can go back and watch the beginning of the video later. We go over the like a very first version of this game, and it has dice as the guests, and it's kind of funky how it works. They eventually turn into tokens. That's right. Something happened where these could flip, right? Or you could do something to like entice them to go into a different room.
Well, I think what it is like when you pulled them out, you always
Oh,
did
that's right.
a
Yeah,
certain
you did
number, right?
three
Like they,
orange and 2 purple, because that was like the distribution of
right?
cabins that you could match.
Yes, of rooms or
So
whatever.
that's why.
Yeah. But then as they went down, they, like this person, if they didn't get taken this round, they were going back to the
Right.
bag next round.
Yeah, and then when you sold them tickets, you got
So it's like this
points
person's
of where they were at. So like if you were kind of satisfying guests who had waited
Yep.
the longest, of course you get the most points. But yeah, so and
Mhm.
then eventually you'll see these turn into meeples. But even when they get to meeples, the variations of how they worked is crazy. So speaking of that, let's go ahead and jump to
Mhm.
a new version. Do you have something else you want to say, Colin?
Hold on, but before
Yes.
we do, can I point something out real quick? I was gonna say, as much as like I feel like a lot of like the top of the board has changed as far as like the flights and the guest and whatever. I think it's interesting. Like this right here is exactly the same
Mm-hmm.
exactly, yeah.
as it is now.
Yep.
Take 2 agenda cards,
Yep.
the same. Though I think that was still a blind draw, but like a lot of these things, a lot of these
Build
actions
development, hire
are
an expert,
still
build 2
the same
things,
thing.
spend money to get resources. Eventually, we integrate ads into that.
Yep.
That came into the game. This one's exactly the same, right?
Right.
Take a new cockpit engine. Of
Yep.
course, they were just
Mhm.
there was one cockpit and one engine. They weren't any different because they didn't have that scoring on them. And then put 2 segments. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is interesting.
It is interesting though to see like some things. It's like they worked super well, and we're
Mhm.
like, okay, we're never changing the silo ever.
Yeah, it just
It's
it worked. Yeah.
yeah, super
Cool.
interesting.
All right, well, let's jump to a new version. Let's get Shim Phillips involved.
Let's do it.
What do y'all want to explain kind of what went down there?
Yes, sir. Yeah, so TK had reached out to Shim before we even started designing Galactic Cruise, I think, because I think the first thing Shim played of ours was like, oh god, something embarrassing probably. Those of you who've been with us for several years may remember Heroes and Henchmen. I think Shim played that, which is anyway, not our shining moment. He and TK had connected over like worship music and having beards and liking board games.
That's great.
And so he played a lot of our stuff. He really he enjoyed Galactic Cruise. He's been very kind. He and S.J. McDonald both have been very kind along the process. And then one day we were playtesting with him, and he offered to make us some icons just for fun. And we thought maybe he would make us like a few icons for fun. What he did though is basically design everything in the game, like new icons for everything. And this is the these are the same icons that we used up until we had the Ian O'Toole stuff. So if you played with us at Origins or Gen Con in 2023 before we had the Ian O'Toole graphic design, these are the icons you
That's
would have
crazy.
seen,
To think they were still existed during that
which
time.
is
Yeah.
is wild. Yeah, I mean, a handful of months ago, these were still the icons we
Yeah.
were using. Now we manipulated them to like
Yeah,
make
all the
them
ones on
work,
here that look not great, I
however we
made
need
them.
to.
So don't blame Shim for something that looks not shimmy, because it was me. Because yeah, it's like it gets to a point where
Yeah.
it's like you have them make as much as they can make, and then you just take it and tweak it on your end, so you have to bug them. But yeah, so this is in September. Okay, so this is 5 months after the last version we looked at. So it was only a month or so after the last version that Shim gave us a kind of the icon makeover. So this is 4 months of playtesting with that. So a lot has changed, but a lot is still the same. So a couple of key things I'll point out is we do have actual guest meeples. So finally made it to having the only people in the game actually be people. And I believe we've still got the blueprints up here. I believe that's what these were called. Now they're the orange prints. And they still have the same function, though, right? You get so many diamonds or whatever in your shuttle, you get the icon types, and you get the number of beds or rooms. But this functions a little differently as far as adding the guests. So whenever you would score a criteria for a blueprint, so there was still the action, which I believe is this one here, top action here. You would choose a blueprint, you would score it, and that white check means you had to meet at least one of the criteria on it. And then the ones that you would score, you would take these guests and you would add them to the bag. So there were 4 levels of guests. There were the guests in the supply. The guests in the supply made it out to the blueprints. And then when you scheduled, the guests from the blueprints made it back into a different bag. And then when the guests moved forward on the queue, you pulled them out of that bag onto the queue, and then you would take them and put them in your shuttle. So it was quite the journey for the people to get onto a cruise ship. But it was interesting in its own way. But yeah, so, Dennis, what do you remember most about this or think's interesting about this specific version?
It's kind of funny that I almost remember this version less than the first version, but even though I played this version way more often, 'cause I definitely like this board layout and the icons. Like wow, like played with this one a whole bunch. And yeah, like this passenger system. I mean, even much after this, it was still changing like constantly. Like that was the thing that was always kind of it's like it just never felt quite right. It was fine. The game still worked overall, but it just never felt quite right. But then there's certain things like these are just straight up what they are today. Just flights requiring less oxygen, and being able to build blueprints for cheaper. Although I guess they were just called segments.
Yeah, there was no double side, right? You may have to pull them out.
Yeah, the blueprints on one side,
yeah.
and flipping over was something that was added only after Ian.
I can't pull stuff out of packs. You want to
involved.
pull some out? Yeah, because the flip side of these was just... Oh, sorry. Just kind of a basic background.
Yeah, because like when we played in person, it was just like a face down stack or whatever, and we would put 5 face up. I gotta say, obviously it didn't work for this game, but I still think that one day down the line, I want to have some community bag building, like we had with these guests, because I thought that was a neat mechanism. Cool. Where it's like, depending on what you score, like you increase the chances that thing would come out later. Cool. And I think this is maybe where we kind of started the idea of like the purple passengers are into like the fanciness. or whatever.
Yeah.
And the orange people are
It's on
about
the
like
ship.
what amenities are in your shuttle.
Yeah.
Even though it didn't make sense because it's like obviously these, if people want the 8, they want the fancy stuff. So I think it's like what they were concerned with, but
Yeah,
not
it was like because
what they
we
like.
called it their.
It's like purple want
I think we
fancy.
called it their preference. It was passenger
Yeah.
preference. And in each game,
Yep.
they had a token.
Mhm.
So like in this game, the purple passengers wanted to have a shuttle that had their room. Like for example, if you look down here, if you combined the racing simulator with zero gravity, the value of this room would be 4 because of the 2 combined segments. So they would be happy to stay in that room. And I think it was one of those things where like you didn't have to meet it, but if you did, you got more bonuses. And then the orange passengers wanted to have at least 2 dining adjacent to their bed. Now I think these were flip sided. They were either shuttle focused or bed specific focused. That you could mix and match each game. And then the gray passengers, they just wanted to have a shuttle that had at least one of each icon in it. And so, still trying to like meet the desires of the passengers in their different preferences of things. The other thing I noticed. Oh, sorry,
Yeah, and
go
these
ahead.
were going when you took the passengers, you would get the bonus
Correct.
here, and I believe they were going straight in.
I think so. Yep, you're adding directly to your shuttle with this action here.
So you'd put them right in.
Yep.
And I don't know if this was in this version or a different version, but you could
Yeah,
like
it
remove.
is.
Yeah, here we go. You could remove stuff from your tower and then like hold somebody here, even though you didn't
Right.
have room for them yet. And then when you built that later, you
Yes.
could
I think that
move
was
them
like the
over.
first concept for us of like pre-selling a ticket that you would use them
Yeah.
for later. Also,
Yeah, so I think these
Yeah,
these
because
ones
you
down
you
here
just
was
got to
like
take them,
income.
right? Like
yes, you just got to take 2. Yep, you would take 2, gain the bonus. You didn't have to spend any
Yeah.
ads or anything. You would just take them, and yeah, and if you had
yeah.
a short
So
shuttle,
like you wanted to
could
be
only
able
hold
to.
one, right?
Yeah.
Or if you didn't have a shuttle
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
whatever. Yeah, and as Dennis mentioned, these were the ones that you would gain during the income phase.
So these ones
Yep.
give you income, whereas these ones were bigger bonus, but then they would also give you a spot to
Right.
store somebody, so that you could hold on to later.
Yep.
And then I think so. This still had the durations where you
It
would
did.
put them
Yep.
somewhere here and they'd
And I think
slide
it's
along.
somewhere around this version where we had
Uh,
those vertical shuttles. Like for a small amount of time, we had these little clips that you could clip these tiles together with, and it would stand up vertically. Probably see some pictures floating around somewhere. Like that was
I also do not at all remember how these
you
got like. What was up with
you wanted
these? I do not
to
remember.
launch. You wanted to launch all 3 different
Yeah.
durations. I think it's like the first time you launch a 3 duration, you
Yep,
flip
I
this
think
one
if
over.
you look at the final scoring, there's something to do with that.
I do not remember that
you
at all.
score
Oh,
one of your
yes.
cards. I think to score
Yeah,
all
it
your
gave
cards.
you the ability to score your
Yeah,
secret
flip.
goals.
Yeah. So you had to do 3
I
different
You don't remember that?
length launches if you wanted to score.
I feel like I remember it now. Like I feel like you like unlocked a repressed
It
memory
probably
or
only
something.
lasted like a playtest or two.
Like
Just
that.
like you
That's
get
wild.
I feel like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like this did not last for that
Yeah.
long.
Yeah. It's interesting. And the thing is, like, that sounds like something that I would have suggested. So, like, I probably forgot my own idea just now. I was probably like, what if you have 3 objectives and you have to. Yeah, I totally remember that now.
All right,
That's
I'm gonna go
crazy,
jump
though.
us forward to another variation. Maybe we'll get to shims
Jump
right
it.
before we get to end. I know we've already been over a little over an hour, so try to wrap it up soon. But just wanted to show kind of the process of development of Galactic Cruise and why we make bad decisions. And the reason is because we think they're good decisions. it's only until many people play and tell us they're terrible that we often realize it. Let's see here. So this is going to be version. Let's see if we're in the 70s. 70s is still shim. 80s is still shim. 90s. 100. Still. Let's see, 110. getting close. 120. There's a lot of versions of this game. 140. 150. Alright. So version 153 on September 13th of 23 is the first time we play with ends stuff. So first, let's look at the last version right before we got to end, because that's going to basically be more or less what the game is right now, I think, or close, just with old artwork.
Yeah, because in this one we
Yeah.
even have the big box cover
We do,
hanging out.
yeah. So we got the box cover.
Oh, look at that. Yeah.
I'm gonna start on the player board. Go down here to the red one. So
Yeah, this is very
this is
close.
very similar. So yeah, you've got the 3 steps of your turn: advance a cruise, activate the type of stop you're on. Step 2, place your worker. We do have this, which we removed. So for a long time in a 2-player game, we had you starting with a 3rd worker, but we kind of fixed that with some NPC workers that you play with. That makes it a little smoother and more like a higher player count game. But you could do the same 3 things.
Mm-hmm.
You could either place your worker, do 2 actions, place your worker, launch, or recall your workers and take 1 action adjacent to your development. All same stuff. Step 3, your resources, developments, your workers, upgrades. I think most of the upgrades are probably the same, right? We've got when you place a cube, gain a funding. Now it's immediately,
Retroactive
gain
as
1.
well.
Right.
That was the same discard token for your launch tower. One thing we can point out is the launch tower is on the right side of your board. It's now on the left.
Mhm.
Ian recommended we put it on the left, since that's the first thing that you would do at the start of your turn is advancing your shuttle, which makes
Left,
a lot more
right.
sense. Increase your shuttle size capacity, take an extra guest, gain extra rep, expert workers, reputation. This one was, I even have it drawn on here because I guess we were testing some different things. But it was like,
We
it's like
did
anytime
change
you go
that,
up
yeah.
or go down on the reputation track, you got everything you crossed over. Now this bonus is just anytime you move up, you cross it. When you play an agenda card, you get the resource on the agenda card. Yep.
Also,
Bucket
Yeah.
workers.
Mhm.
Yep. And then I think launching's same. Tokens are more or less the exact same. Yeah, so this is just the old iconography right before. We had a flight plan board. That's what we called this one. And I believe the guests, did you pay? You paid it for as many as they crossed over, which is the kind of the same
Yeah.
Right.
idea.
Same
just
thing, but
in a
different.
more clear
Yeah.
way. But then our cruise tiles had just the different planets and days in space represented by satellite. And of selling tickets, you got 1 money per guest. There was no reputation. Oh, there is reputation, but it was tied to
Yeah.
So when you scheduled, there were no cruise consultants at this point. When you scheduled, you would do that, which you would still flip a token in your launch tower. That's what that icon is. But then when guests were placed here, you would get a reputation if there was a cube over there, or vice versa.
For completing
Yeah,
the
so
loop.
like if somebody
Yeah.
had scheduled a cruise with guests, then you would gain reputation for placing a cube. I really enjoyed that thematically and mechanically, but it just got really fiddly. There was a lot of icons and it was confusing, and so we decided to simplify that a little bit once Ian started working on it. But
Mhm.
yeah, I think everything else on the main board is gonna function more or less exactly the same. Can y'all see anything that is any different? I think it's
Yeah, this is pretty close to the
No,
same
like
thing.
in so many ways, like this is the version that I remember. I mean, obviously I remember it the most because it's the most recent non-Ian version. But I think everything here has a pretty direct counterpart to
right.
what we have now, as far as the layout's different, but the company goals are the same kinds of things that they were. I don't know if these were double-sided for the. Yeah. So this is when we had a 2-player side. Now we just have
Start,
the when you play 2-player, you just start. Yep. Yeah, I think this is again, like if you played with us at like a convention last year, like towards like the middle of the year, this is probably the version that you
Yep.
played. So for a lot of
This was
people, like this is the physical version that they
This is
have
true.
played.
Yep.
If they've not, made it out to a more recent
Mhm.
convention. So
I think this is probably what we played at Origins. Was like exactly this
I think
version.
so.
I would
And
imagine.
yeah,
Gen-Con. Yeah.
and Gen Con, I guess, because at Gen Con we didn't have
And Gen
this
Con.
is still the
Yep.
version we had. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, because this was September.
So so one thing like this hasn't changed mechanically, but you may notice that we've got these like gray guests that want to go to the moon and they want to eat food. So that this works the same way where during a day in space you would gain resources. Although this did work, pretty sure this version it did work slightly differently. I don't remember if it was each guest times number of icons at that point,
Yeah, it
or
works
if it was
much
something
different
else.
ways.
Because we went through a number of versions with that too.
Hmm.
But yeah, this got changed into a much clearer thing, partially because purple does not even match at all. Like these ones, the orange one is kind of the best, where they were all sort of orange. It's like, okay, Mars, and then this is kind of an orange ping pong paddle. But that change to relaxing, family, adventurous was
More cohesive.
great
Yeah. So
to
instead
have
of
that.
like great guest
Way more.
dining,
Yeah.
it was relaxing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it also got a little more like realistic. I mean, there's not really anything realistic in our game. I mean, from segment to segment, sometimes there's gravity, sometimes there's not. But I know for a fact you can't go to Saturn; it's too far away, and I'm pretty sure it's not even solid. So I was very glad that these eventually got replaced with
More
the
thematic. Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
fun destinations that Ian made for us.
Well, they were always placeholders. Like it was never really meant to
Right.
be.
Oh, for sure. But yeah, I feel like we always had playtesters like, you can't actually go to Saturn. And it's like, yeah, well, you can't go to Mars either. Actually, you can't go to the
Right.
moon. But
Yeah.
um, but anyway, so it was nice though, like when those placeholders finally got like, uh, you know, their place taken.
All right. I'm gonna pull up
So
first version we had with N, and this it felt so. It was such a different feeling, like um,
Yeah.
just seeing N's layout design for the first time. Because like I remember the first time I played it, I was like, this doesn't even feel like the same game. Because it was so different.
yeah,
It was
like
the first few moments of it were like, yeah, did we mess something up? Like what? It feels wrong. But like,
I know, like saying the words like I don't like this. It's not the right words, but it's like yeah. It was so unfamiliar
Yeah.
the first time that we changed layouts because like we changed, back to that horizontal orientation. Nothing was in the same place. It was just it's like moving into a new house, and you're like, Mom and Dad, I want to go back home. This is not our house.
But then you're there for a
And
week
then,
and you're like, oh,
you get used to it.
This is it. This is amazing. Yeah, so
Yep.
this is the first stuff we received from N. So he like immediately sent over everything, and we quickly put it up onto TTS. And what's wild now is like looking at this now, I'm like, oh yeah, this is exactly what it is. Like it all makes sense. It all looks great. But I just remember the first time looking at this, I was like, holy moly, this is wild. And like he had moved our launch tower to the left side of the board, and I'm like, no, it's supposed to be on the right side of the board. And he's like, no, it's better this way, trust me. It's like, okay, all right, we'll trust you. But yeah, so yeah, looking at the main boards, this is pretty much what you see now, with more color, of course. But you got agenda cards on the left side. You've got a progress track with the different tiles that come out, company goals, the technologies, the locations. Oh, what's interesting is this actually isn't the first thing he sent over. right?
It is not. Yeah, this has some of the
No.
Yeah,
tweaks we
the
made.
first thing he sent over had the locations being round. Because I think he had
Yeah, I think this is probably the first time that we had like all the stuff,
yes,
right? Because he sent over
yeah,
the main
yeah. He
board,
sent over
but
things
like we
in
didn't
pieces, but we didn't
have
have
like
other stuff.
blueprints and
That's
things.
right. So
Right.
this was like because we made a few tweaks along the way. Um, we don't have a lazy river anymore. Yeah, basic blueprints, the build side, on the other side, cockpits, engines, cruise tiles, the guests area up here. Yeah, because this marketing board looked quite different the first time he sent it over. Because we were still trying to do that whole gain the reputation when you pair a cube to a guest, and it just looked very cluttered, and we were like, this is not going to work. And so we switched to this, and he kind of created this travel agency, which is awesome. Yeah, you'll notice the ads used to be green, the money used to be brown, the reputation used to be brown.
And circular.
And we tweaked a few of those things along the way just to make everything stand out, pop a little more, and be able to kind of identify it quicker at a glance. And these actions here, the action icons changed because we added the cruise consultant. Oh, that is something here. So there's no cruise consultant yet in this version. The marketing board just still has you placing a cube behind the desk.
Yep.
So once we added the cruise consultant, that's when that icon kind of showed up, and then the guest was replaced there. What do y'all want to?
Got a message from
nice.
Fritz saying
Hello.
hi. So hi, Fritz, if you're still around.
Hello.
Says he's ducking in and out.
I think everything on the player board's pretty similar, right? If anything, it's just like clarifying a few small things, but it's mostly there, of course, with more color now. But yeah, that was the first version from N that we played with and got printed. We took. Did we take a white version anywhere? Like the next big convention we had was PAX, and we had a main board at that point.
Yeah, so a white version went to Essen.
That's right.
Went to Essen, yeah.
But I don't know if we took a white version anywhere.
Yeah, I think we just had it sent to Essen, I think.
Yeah. And then I'm sure we played it in person a few
Yeah.
times. But yeah, that was that one. Now let's wrap it up. Jump to our most recent version.
Ooh, look at that.
I've got nothing to look at yet.
I don't know. I think maybe the first version looks a little better than this. No, I'm just kidding. This is obviously amazing and perfect, and I love it.
Here, I'll load a 4-player game so we can see the stuff out on the board. The buttons aren't showing up for me for some reason. Oh, no, they're there.
I think they were still just loading for you.
With running the stream. Yeah, this is more or less the final version. About the only thing that'll be different is you can kind of see on these tiles over here, these white spots. Those are actually holes. That'll be able to slot those tokens in. But yeah, fantastic looking facility with different buildings. Yeah, it took me forever when I was looking at that white version to realize that these were going to be 3D buildings. But when I finally, like I saw it the first time, I was like, oh, wow, that's awesome. Then you can kind of see the cruise consultant now exists, as does the icon in action for scheduling with the cruise consultant. And then, of course, the player board with the different destination art and kind of the building facility with your resource housings and your launch tower with your launch elevator.
I think the 3D effect is pretty convincing. Like I remember at PAX, a lot of people came up and were like, "Oh, like this is just, flat,"
Right.
because like it looked like it was 3D.
Well, and we have so many people who think that our main board is like dual layered, like it's recessed, and it's not. That's actually something that we had talked about, considered, but ultimately there were some concerns about like warping, and warping is not something you want on your main board. But yeah, there's a lot of people who think that like the way that he's drawn this, that from a distance that it is dual layered, which is it's a very cool look.
Yeah.
To have.
Yeah, it's great.
Yep.
All the way down to little people walking around.
Yeah, there's lots of little details that's in here. The one that I always like pointing out to people, you got to zoom all the way in and take a look at your marketing board, and you can see these little posters. And that's one of my favorite things. Just a little kind of Easter
I love
egg.
that, and then I love how the desks down through here have various amounts of papers scattered around them. So you have some people who are very, I guess, very organized. Some people who have piles of paper several places. Like that attention to detail, and then just like here on the sidewalks, like the little people who are walking about on the campus of this place. I really do think when a lot of people get this game in person and have it out on their table, you're gonna have a lot of people who are spend probably more time than they were planning on looking at all the little details that Ian has put on here, because it is truly something to behold.
No doubt. Cool. Well, anything else y'all want to add in or thoughts about the development process before we wrap it up?
I think I just wanted to mention this one thing that we skipped over is between it was before Ian, but there was a point in time where you had to unlock things. So like you couldn't go to Saturn until you unlocked the ability to go to Saturn.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There was that version that existed for a while. You couldn't build more than the first row of your developments until you unlocked that.
I think that was the version right before.
And how'd you unlock stuff? I can't remember.
Upgrades.
How did you
on
unlock
the,
stuff?
Destinations. So whenever you scheduled a cruise,
Mm-hmm.
instead of flipping over a token, well, maybe you still flipped it over. I can't remember. But when you launched, it went on the left side of your player board, and on the left side of your player board, you had
That's
this
right.
section of things you could unlock,
Yes.
and they were basically like
Yeah.
things like Dennis was talking about: be able to build more developments, be able to go to different destinations, things like that.
Mm-hmm. I do remember that, and I don't miss it. So there we go.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, I think throughout this dive, you can definitely see all the places where we started saying yes to people, rather than like, no, you can't do that. We just open up ways for people to do things.
Yeah, it's just more fun that way, right? Like restrictions can be fun, and they add that tension of like, you got to do that to do this and all that. But for some reason, we found the fun in this one with like being able to get to those big moments quicker and being able to experience those big moments several times throughout the game, as opposed to just one big moment that took you forever to get to. So,
Right.
cool. Well, if you're still watching, we appreciate you hanging out and checking it out. And if you're watching this back non-live later, feel free to drop comments and we'll get the notification and we'll answer any questions you have about the development or different versions of the game, about why we kept things, didn't keep things, or different parts of the game that you're interested in or just want to know more about. But we will call it there, and thanks so much for hanging out and watching.
Yeah.
See you later.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
See ya.
See ya.